This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and today I'm in Holy Trinity Church on the High Street, which Canon Robert Cotton has kindly allowed us to use to re-interview three councillors who we first interviewed 6 months ago when they were freshly elected to Guildford Borough Council. They are Maddie Redpath, James Steele and George Potter. So Maddie, you've been at the council now for 6 months. Is being a councillor as you expected it to be?
I think it's a lot harder, I suppose, than I expected it to be, in terms of you have to constantly keep questioning yourself. You have to constantly question whether you're doing things for the right reasons, whether you're being made biased by either maybe the officers, other councillors or the residents. So in that sense, self-reflection, I've spent a long time reflecting on why I'm making these decisions. In terms of time capacity, it seems to be a lot busier than I was expecting, to be perfectly honest. It's as much time as you want to spend on it. So. Right,
so you feel that you are in control of it, but because you're being conscientious, it's taking up quite a lot of your time.
I think everyone is. It's not necessarily just because I'm being conscientious, reviewing what I'm making decisions of. It's taking up a lot of time because local politics is incredibly slow. It's a lot slower than I thought it would be.
Okay, and James?
I didn't really know anything how to expect how it was going to be like. On some elements, I expected there to be more sort of levels of officer, almost like hierarchy, but I've not noticed that at all, and it's been very easy to talk to, especially the directors, all three directors, and also the managing director. Time-wise, I didn't expect when I did get elected to also go onto the executive. It also means that I've been put a lot more time, especially in the day bits for it, where you kind of get told that there'll be a few night meetings and a lot of like background reading at home, but I've done a fair bit actually in and around the council offices, which is interesting.
You're an executive member. Does that mean that you have to spend more time on council work?
Yes, especially looking at things. So, of course, my major things at the moment are the new museum. I'm at the beginning stages of starting to look to revamp the visitor and tourism strategy. There's other elements that require me to sort of have concentration on those elements, and then also looking at the general executive forward plan and what other executive members are doing.
But you're still studying?
Still studying.
And you're fitting it in all together okay?
Fairly okay at the moment, yeah. It's quite good.
Over to you, George. Now, you're working full-time?
Yep.
So how are you finding balancing the work and council commitments?
Very difficult. I think I'm managing it, but I think that the big thing that was different to what I expected was, on the one hand, the amount of time it would take, particularly if you want to do the job properly, which I do. I think realistically, if you want to do the job properly, you really need to be able to do, even as a backbench councillor, 1 to 2 days a week, full-time devoted to council stuff, and I can't imagine how much time the executive members have to put in. So that's been one surprise. I don't regret it, but it's definitely keeping me very busy. I think the other thing that surprised me is, to echo what Maddie said, it's quite slow a lot of the time. Some things have happened much faster than I expected, whereas other things are very much sort of like wading through cold treacle. And that's sort of the thing that I didn't quite anticipate, was how much sort of persistence was needed to make progress on certain issues.
I'll be asking you about some frustrations later. But now, in the last interview 6 months ago, you said that you thought the most important of the 7 Nolan principles was openness. Do you think that the council has done, and indeed you and others, other councillors from other parties, campaigned to say that they would be more open in future? Do you think the council is more open now?
I think, is it more open? Yes, I would say. Is it open enough yet? Probably not. And I think that I think this is going to be an ongoing process, because it's not just a matter of a decision. Openness is a mentality, it's a culture.
Yes.
And I think that's sort of what's happening. But I have to say, what has been very encouraging is how all the new councillors from all parties have all been very much on the same page on that. And I feel, ask me again in 4 years, and I think I'll have a very positive answer to give. But at the moment, it is still a work in progress.
Okay, and James, you also said openness. Now, can you name any particular measure the council has taken to be more open?
I could say for what I've done in terms of with the museum working group, where all the things that I've been discussing with the major projects officers and also the consultant we bring in for the museum, all those elements are then at the next museum working group meeting with all the councillors is always shown, always sort of publicised and always put there, which I've been quite pleased to see.
Okay, but do you think culturally there's been much of a shift? George mentioned the culture there.
I definitely think it's a rolling progress. That, like, we are more, I believe, more open than where we were 8 months ago, but there is still a fair bit to go.
Okay, but the only example you can think of is in your own particular area.
At this point in time, but from what I've seen from other elements, it seems like it's becoming a lot more open as well.
Okay, and Maddie, now you said the most, I think you probably did want to say openness, but because the other two said that, you went to honesty.
Yes.
So what's your view on councillors keeping that in mind in their council activity?
I think, I've obviously got to know the councillors who were in the last administration a lot better. I don't think...
Well, there's not many of them left.
Well, no comment. I think they didn't start off, and I don't think they went into being a councillor with any misintent, or I would like to say, and I can't have any evidence for that, but I don't think anyone goes into this job deliberately to mislead or to misinform. In the 6 months I've been in council, I can completely see how you can go down that path. I can completely see how you lack trust in people and how you eventually get worn down to a point where you start repeating the actions that are put onto you. And whether that's by other councillors from a previous administration or whether that's by officers or members of the public even, you are told false information. And it is up to you to then go and check it out. You can't take anything for granted. So one thing I will say from 6 months on is I can see how people become dishonest. I can see how you can fall into those cracks, but it is up to you as an individual.
And what's the motivation to not be honest? You know,
I think it's...
Because these aren't bad people,
no,
are they?
No, I think it's self-preservation. I think it's the fear that you're going to be publicly judged, the fear that it's going to be all over social media, on Facebook, or, you know, and one day, you know, you just reach a point where it's easier just to not say anything than to be honest.
But isn't our mother's advice that honesty is the best policy?
Yeah,
isn't it still apply?
I see it as like if you are constantly lied to or misinformed, not lied to, then you reach a point where it's just too difficult to just keep researching everything yourself, and so it's easier to say nothing.
But do you think one of the motivations is to avoid political embarrassment?
On some levels, I think the majority of councillors don't look at it as a stepping stone to future politics. So, I
didn't mean really that. I meant that, you know, that they're worried about what's being said behind the scenes and revealing that to the public. I'm looking for an honest answer.
I suppose possibly. I wouldn't know. I mean, the thing is I personally don't get invited to the closed door. I mean, we as a full council, we obviously get closed door meetings. I haven't been invited to one single one where I've thought, if this got leaked, that, you know, it would be appalling. There's not one where I've thought, if this got leaked or anything, that it would reflect badly on the council. Those meetings, I believe, are kept to a smaller group of councillors.
Now, as an example, it's just one example, but you all said last time you very much agreed that the younger generation had something to bring to the table in terms of fighting climate change and bringing the climate emergency to the fore. Yet recently, the Guildford Dragon's been told that the committee that looks at climate change and innovation will be meeting in private. I think there is going to be a public forum as well, but the actual committee will be in private. Given their requirement for openness, do you think that's the right thing to do?
Well, no. I have actually emailed Caroline to see if we could get it recorded. I was told that the minutes would be published online. I wasn't told anything further on why it can't be recorded. It was a committee I wanted to go on, particularly because I'm a mechanical engineer. Innovation is something that's... So
you're not allowed to go on it?
Well, I wasn't allowed to. They were worried I wouldn't have the time commitments because I work full time. Okay. It does concern me, I don't know if either of you are on it, but it does concern me that, I mean, I know I work full time, but I do have skills and assets I could give to the...
James, can you imagine what it is in that committee they're going to be discussing that the public shouldn't know about?
I mean, unless there's huge amounts to do with either legal or financial stipulations, I I mean, it's the first I've heard that it's going to be
Okay,
have
fair
a
enough.
private thing. I can understand if there was a sort of premium elements to it to discuss certain things with key specialist people, but I hope there is a good balance between at least public participation in it.
And George, can you fill in the gap here? Can you imagine why that needs to be done in private?
Well, I can have a fairly good guess, which is that given that the purpose of the meeting is meant to be getting not just councillors but also experts, external representatives, stakeholders, officers and so on around the table to talk about things and to work on an action plan, and a lot of this is very much sort of workman-like type activities, I can understand, for one thing, it will probably be meeting not in the full council chamber, but in one of the smaller committee rooms of council, which doesn't have the capacity for live streaming or for a public audience.
Yeah, but that's not what we're talking about necessarily, because we were just asking as reporters if we could come and report.
Well, no, yeah, so that's one aspect of it. But I also imagine to give an example of another committee, I was on. We have a joint committee that scrutinises the budget each year. That meets in private. Minutes are taken and so, but it's not open to the public. But the reason we do that is because although our findings, our conclusions are going to be public, some of the time it helps a lot more if people feel able to speak completely candidly behind closed doors about saying, I have reservations about this for X reason and Y reason, but as an example, this reservation might contradict with, say, what another
but
person
people,
might
I mean, the residents are adults. We understand that's what happens. We understand that sometimes people propose ideas that actually, as soon as you start examining them, they don't stand up. But if we're going to treat climate change and the issue seriously, don't we all need to be on board? And don't we all need to see that the council is actually acting on this?
Yes, no, I agree, and I feel there are things about that particular board that I'd like to improve. I'd like there to be more transparency around it.
I mean, if there were confidential issues, they could be taken to one side, couldn't they?
Yeah, sure.
Because I can understand. I think everyone can understand. There might be separate parts.
No, sure.
That need to
but
be.
I mean, but as an example, if you've got someone coming from, say, from one of the major employers in the town, and they say to the committee, well, look, quite candidly, my employer is being bad on X, Y, Z.
Yes.
Actually, if you were to pressure them,
Exactly.
And
that's an example where you need to take it to one side, but it's not the general run of things.
Well, no, I agree. I think it's more a question of this is the default for working groups. That there are many working groups and subcommittees, which the default is you don't publish minutes, you don't have public meetings. I think. So I believe that's.
So is that part of the cultural change you're talking about?
I'd say so, yes, because I think it should be openness by default. In this case, it has been to confidentiality by default, but also we've got 4 years of this council. I think come the end of this municipal year, you have to re-elect members of all of the working groups and similar. So I'm hoping that within a few months we should be able to make some changes on that front.
And George, on the same theme of openness, the Guildford Dragon has banged on about the provenance of the Surrey County Council letter of support for the Wisley Garden Village scheme. Given the result of that inquiry, some of which we've been able to see, the summary, do you still have confidence in GBC's ability to investigate itself?
I'd say overall, yes, but I feel in terms of I have less confidence in its ability to be clear about its findings, which I feel was the problem in this case. Because the actual outcome was effectively, the summary does say, the Borough Council did not pay for the developer to do any of this work or anything like that. They did not pay them to.
We don't know that, do we? The summary said that there was no record of the payment.
Yes, which in effect would mean yes, but given we were talking about public funds, if money had gone out of one of the GBC bank accounts, there would be a record of it. So unless we're talking about that some officer dipped into their own pocket to privately pay a developer, which I feel is quite unlikely.
Okay, but the summary wasn't conclusive about that.
And this is my point. I feel that a lot of it is quite ambiguous. I also feel the fact that they didn't interview the relevant lead councillors at the time because they said, well, and I can understand the logic of saying, well, the investigation found that all the questions had effectively already been answered from speaking to the officers, so they didn't feel any need to speak to the lead councillors. I can understand that logic, but again, from a point of view of giving people confidence in the findings and maximum transparency possible, it's not the best thing of the world, and I feel that's sort of the problem with it. But do I trust the actual finding? Yes, I think.
No wrongdoing?
I think it was an error of judgment, and I preferred if they'd said that there were going to be clear lessons learned. But
Well, that's what they did say. But I mean, what's going to happen to the people that made the mistakes?
Well, that's the thing. There's nothing mentioned about that. I mean, and I have to say, I personally can't judge given I wasn't in that position, but I think it would be. I feel it's a mistake not to let people know.
It's a serious thing, isn't it?
Yes,
When a letter is put forward as something which it's not.
Yes, I agree, and I feel it is a bit of a shame that the only public outcome is to say lessons have been learned, let's move on. I think behind the scenes it's probably going to have been dealt with a lot more firmly than that, and but from a public point of view, and I do see why it doesn't come across that way.
Okay, James. Now, if I was investigating a crime against you and I was a police officer and I came and said, "Oh, I've spoken to the others. I've got the clear picture now. I don't need to speak to you about it," what would you think?
I think that would be pretty wrong.
Yeah.
I do believe that for the investigation, they should have contacted the relevant lead members at the time, so they would at least for a sort of transparency's sake, and knowing that we make sure that even if you have all the full picture, like the same in science, you don't just stop doing results until because you kind of got a clear picture. You do it until you make sure that you're absolutely certain of what you've got. I do believe they should have been contacted. Generally, I haven't really got an opinion on the complaints procedure yet because I haven't seen them in action.
Yeah, we should highlight that this didn't go under the official complaints procedure.
No.
It was dealt with outside of that because no complaint had been made. Okay.
But I would need to see it happening more to actually gauge a picture. But generally, I do have confidence in the managing director at least having some input into it. But yeah.
Okay, and Maddie?
I don't know if I have an issue with the complaints, as you said.
No, that wasn't the question. The
sorry.
question was, do you have confidence in GBC's ability to police itself? This isn't the first instance.
On this particular instance, no. Right. And the main issue I had with the findings of the report was there was no one to blame. Everyone was kept innocent. And at the end of the day, if you didn't know this was happening in your department, and going back to the Nolan's principles, it is a lack of leadership. You need to know what your staff are doing. If they're doing this and they've done it under your watch, you are accountable for that. And that's the bottom line. And the fact that they can turn around and say no one's to blame, but there are lessons to be learned, I think I know exactly who is to blame, to be quite frank. And it's the leader of that department.
Right, okay. Right, let's lighten the mood a bit slightly now and talk about what's been the most frustrating but also the most satisfying experience. I don't mind which order you take those in your time as a councillor.
Well, let's end on a high, so I'll start with the most frustrating. I think I've found probably the most frustrating thing is when I've been given reports and I've looked into them, done some background research and found that the figures or the basic outline of the reports have been either the figures are completely wrong or it's completely misleading and biased. I found that very alarming to say. I mean, it seems to be following the same trajectory of the last administration. I don't blame the officers at all. If they're told to write a report on something, they're probably told already to write it to look for this final outcome. But I do find it alarming how biased some of the reports I've been given are. The most positive thing, I think, I want to say how well R4GV and the Liberal Democrats have been working. I say that with some hesitation because obviously there's a long way to go. And
well,
I know
there are bound to be issues, I guess. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I'm getting the impression that the general working together is happening to a degree.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what happens in the executive particularly. Backbenchers, I can work with any of them, and that's from any party actually. And I think there's a lot of teething process going on.
Okay, but do you, as younger councillors, tend to group together a bit as well, or not?
I think James and I tend to.
Okay.
Yeah.
They leave you out, George.
Yeah, we do.
Sorry, James, what are you going to say on this?
That's okay. I would say for frustrating, it was at the start getting huge 200, 300-page documents of committee reports and going, right, I'm going to have to, it's trading through them, trying to make sure that you understand what's been said, what's trying to be agreed, what isn't trying to be agreed, so that you don't feel clueless when you actually get to either the vote or to the discussion of the topic.
So just to pick up on that, I mean, is it fair for councillors who are given a very small allowance actually annually, £6,000, a bit more for you because you're an executive member, but is it fair to expect these time demands on them, or should the council work on summarising the issues more so that it's manageable?
I would preferably like it that if we were given them longer in advance, just to actually have time to go over them. I mean, I've had situations where I've been given, for the executive, like a 200-page document a day before the executive meeting, and it's been a bit like, whoa, I've got to really quickly sit down, put something aside to actually get this written. Where if I prefer to be given more time to be able to read it through and read it properly to know what I'm agreeing to. Okay. But I understand some things that things do pop up quite late, and reasoning for that.
And the most satisfying thing?
I agree with Maddie in terms of the working with R4GV and the Lib Dems, but also probably quite simplistic is just getting them a thank you from residents whenever you sort little bits out for them. It's quite satisfying when you get somebody wanting to sort out your bins or something to do with a neighbour's car being parked weirdly, and you're able to sort of help it out a bit and getting a thank you email afterwards. It's quite satisfying.
Yeah, I imagine so. George, what about you? Frustration, and I think I know what might be the frustration. Carry on.
Oh, he's got a guess already. Okay, so I'd actually say the most frustrating thing, to echo what Maddie said, is often to do with the officers' reports, and which I'd say is, I don't think it's a matter of direction. I think it's just that some politicians influencing reports. I just think it's a problem with the way that the system works in it and of itself.
Another cultural problem?
Perhaps more of a process problem as well. Okay. But in particular, what I found particularly frustrating was when we had an issue relating to a car parking issue in my ward at Sutherland Car Park, where the officer's reports on both times it came first to council and then to the executive, officers' reports made no mention of the fact that apparently what residents were asking for wasn't legally possible.
Okay, we better just say that we're talking about the Burpham car park.
Yeah, the Sutherland car park.
Sutherland Park car park.
Where residents wanted the restrictions suspended, and then when we actually got to the executive meeting, we were told, well, it's not legally possible to suspend it, but this hadn't been mentioned in any of the reports up to that point. Right. We finally got a full explanation of the law, of what the differences were versus other situations. But that came in the form of a letter written to the Dragon by the relevant lead member after the fact, not in the officer's reports. And I often feel that, to me, as the biggest frustration is that quite often when you sit down to make a decision, you think you're going off of the best information available,
yes.
And then it turns out that suddenly you can be told...
in fact, in that case, it meant that the full council passed a motion that wasn't actually enforceable.
Yes.
Right.
Which, and I think that to me has been the biggest frustration, in that I don't think it's negative intent.
That was the frustration, I guessed.
Yes.
And your frustration was noticeable at the meetings.
Yeah.
And I think many people would think understandable. But now let's, what about the most satisfying thing?
I think probably the most positive, probably a tie. On the one hand, the stuff on climate change, as everything with DBC, I still feel it moves a bit slower than I would like, but I definitely get the sense that there is real progress happening now. In the budget, we're going to be committing a significant sum of money towards actual proper planning on the climate change agenda, and to actually get towards being a properly carbon neutral borough, which I think is a fantastic achievement. Similarly, nothing quite as tangible yet, but I also get the impression that a lot is being done behind the scenes to prepare the ground for a proper agenda to tackle the housing affordability crisis in Guildford. And I think, to me, both of those things are what I'd say are the biggest achievements and positives so far.
That's a very nice segue, thank you, George, into my next question, because it is about, do you think the council has enough power over planning issues locally?
No.
So what change would you like to see?
I think it's a difficult one, because really the entire post-war planning system needs to be torn up and need to start again from scratch.
But that's not going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen. I think one of the biggest frustrations, I think, is got to be, on the one hand, the unaccountability of the planning inspectorate, because you can have all the reasons you think possible, you can have a local plan in favour of you, you can have councillors all sing from the same hymn sheet, but if a planning inspector decides that they disagree with the decision, your only option is to lobby the Secretary of State, who's just simply under no imaginable universe will have the time to review every case brought to him, asking, please can you change the inspector's decision?
Okay, thank you. And James, your view on whether planning, you have enough power on planning?
Agree with George, no. We need a lot more power coming down from central government so that councils can have more power and more control over what happens.
Do you think there's any clash between building on Greenbelt and our challenges on climate change?
That's a good question. I think, too much building on Greenbelt wall does have the clash. I do believe there can be a right mix, because of some of the designs that I've seen come forward, some of the things I've seen in my own ward with the orchards in just off Southway have such high levels of environmental and ecological design built into them that they are effectively, if not close to, being sort of carbon net zero, which is fantastic.
Okay. Now, Maddie, R4 GV many people voted for them because they were unhappy with the local plan and they were hoping for a change of direction. We haven't seen much. Do you think it's going to happen?
I would like to say so. I think going back to the MPPF put such restrictions on using brownfield
the National
sites.
Planning
The National Planning Policy
Framework. Sorry.
They put so many restrictions on using brownfield sites that when the local plan was formed, they were rightfully excluded. However, I do believe that the administration at the time should have looked into ways of making them work within the national planning framework.
Right.
So I think.
So you don't think the council's approach to the local plan was right?
Exactly. I think if I was to do it again, if I was to, from day one of the local plan, I would look at these sites, look at why they aren't acceptable, and then work, whether it's flooding or what have you, and look at alleviating those problems. And that's, but at a national level, they're incredibly
And
strict.
one thing I've never managed to get to the bottom of is why why constraints that were available were not applied in the local plan. But I'm guessing that you don't know either.
I don't know.
No.
Anyway.
Okay. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Are you still pleased that you've been elected? And if there's another local election tomorrow, would you all put your names forward?
I am pleased I was elected. I think there has been a definite shift in attitudes in Guildford Borough Council. Whether that's enough, I don't believe so. I think we need to actually have active change. If I was to do it again tomorrow, I would definitely have I would take into account more of what my mother thinks, because obviously my father's also a councillor, so she gets...
So you ignore him?
Yes, exactly. Well, she gets it from both ends of the bickering, and
Okay.
so I do feel for her, but I would take into account what my family and friends think before I decide to run again.
Okay.
It does take a huge strain on your social life.
I could big agree on that one.
Yeah.
I'm definitely glad that I ran. I've met some fantastic people already in the last 6 months, been able to learn a whole range more as well, which has been fantastic. I really hope there wouldn't be an election tomorrow because I don't like winter elections.
No, but I mean, would you stand again if the decision was today?
Yeah, I would definitely stand again. I definitely would want to represent Westborough again.
Okay.
I'm still absolutely thrilled to have been elected as a councillor.
You've been in this game a bit longer, haven't you, George? You stood before.
Yeah, I've stood before, yes. Yeah. I've been involved for a long time. So I'd like to think that in theory I had more idea of what I was getting into, but in practice I don't think I did. But still, it's an absolute privilege being a councillor. And if there's an election tomorrow, I definitely would stand again. Although that being said, ask me again if I was signing up for... Ask me again at the end of the term, of this term, my answer would probably be yes. Ask me again at the end of that one, and the answer might be different. Because I do feel it's a lot like, to paraphrase a saying used about Oxford universities, have a social life, sleep, do your job as a councillor, pick any two.
Okay, good point. Right, last question. Short answers, please. I'm giving you each a little pinch of magic dust. You can apply it to any issue in Guildford Borough that you want to. What would you use it for?
I think, honestly, if I had one thing, I would probably actually use it to make Guildford a unitary authority, just on the basis that it's not particularly eye-catching or exciting, but I think across a wide range of issues, the increased powers and not having split decision-making will probably do far more good in a whole lot of areas than magic dust could do in any one single area.
Good answer, George. James?
Oh, yeah, you're sort of taking a good one off me there. I've got like a unitary.
It doesn't have to be so high level. It could be something smaller.
I would go just the reversal of all the spending cuts to local government. I can tell from being in here for 6 months that money's tight, is incredibly tight in the GBC, and for us, and it would be better for us.
So would your dust be used to revert to the old system of grants from the central government?
Yeah, to actually basically reinstate them back to pre-2010 levels in real terms, because that would massively benefit local government.
And your national politicians would have to sort out the funding of that.
Probably, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think I can't think of anything as big scale as that, so I'll go with the attitudes in Guildford Borough Council. If I could not wipe their minds, but maybe get rid of past hindrances that have I feel like a lot of the older administration and the officers that have been there a long time have, like I said before, have been worn down to a point, and I'd love to see them when they were at their prime and still ready and raring to go. So I suppose rejuvenate the Guildford Borough Council staff would be great.
Okay, that's great. Maddie, James, George, thank you very much for your time this morning. If I may say, I think that was demonstrating openness, so thank you very much.